Hey everybody, before we get to Tristan, I wanted to deliver a quick PSA. So we are Every Night is Game Night. We are about fun, we're about entertainment, we're about every night being game night, which we think is a really great thing. But every once in a while, real life gets in the way and there's really nothing we can do about it. So as some of you know, I am Puerto Rican and my island is going through some really, really tough times right now. I mean, words just cannot express. So this is the first time I'm really talking about it on air because over the last couple of weeks, it's been really emotional for me. I haven't been able to get in touch with family. All the cell towers are down, all that kind of thing. But as of this past weekend, we have everybody accounted for, all of my peoples, which has been a really great thing for me. But a lot of other people haven't been as blessed. So just wanted to get the word out there that whatever anybody can do in order to help, in order to contribute, whether it's through direct donation or whether through working with your church or your local community group, we could use all the help that we can get. So personally, I have contributed to a fund called Unidos por Puerto Rico, which is run by the governor's wife. If you want a specific place that you can donate, but there's lots of places where you can help out. So just didn't want to take too much time with this, but it's really important to me to get the word out. So that's it. On to the show. Every Night is Game Night preview series number 13. Gloom of Kilforth expansions with Tristan Hall. Yo, my peoples, what's up? Welcome back to the preview series, the, at this point, weekly show where you get to preview some Kickstarters and figure out if you want to spend your hard-earned money on even more board games. Yay! So this time we have a Kickstarter that actually was successful a little while ago, and they are back with expansions. We would like to welcome the designer of Gloom of Kilforth and talk about some of those expansions. Welcome to the show, Tristan Hall.
Hello, Jason. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you for coming, and thank you for adjusting to time zone differences. This is always a little bit of a difficulty, but we're here and we're doing it. Even though you're the one chilling out in the afternoon and I'm the one waking up in the morning, but that's okay.
I appreciate you taking the hit on the time zone thing there, Jason.
I always love these. This is super fun. Okay, so we're here, and I think this is the first time that I have had a regular, someone who has actually done a podcast on this thing. So this is going to go smooth as butter, right, man?
There will be no hassles or problems at all.
No, we're not going to have to record this again because we screwed it up. No. So yeah, let's actually start right there. You are so there's a lot to you, but you are a regular podcaster on the Board Chitless podcast. Is that correct?
That's right. We have, as you say, Board Chitless, which started out as a weekly podcast and then sort of slowed down a little bit because we've had a couple of Kickstarters happen in the past couple of months. But once things settle down again, we'll be sure to pick them back up. And it's mostly just us blathering about the games that we've played this week or this month. And then every other podcast, we try to get a guest designer, a board game designer on board and do an interview. So it's great because I get to speak to my heroes in the industry and we just get to talk about games and have fun. So yeah, it's a nice enough format. It's quite a humble little podcast, I think.
Cool. And yeah, so tell us a little bit more about yourself aside from that. So I know that listening to the podcast that you are a giant fantasy nerd. So like D&D and, you know, Lord of the Rings. So I imagine that's a big part of your backstory there.
Yeah, I've always been a huge geek, and I played years of Dungeons and Dragons growing up as a teenager, and lots of other role-playing games and stuff. But I just, you know, I'm married and settled down, I've got a child and a house and all that kind of stuff, and don't really have the time to play or commit to role-playing games anymore. So I think rediscovering board games as an adult was my sort of way of getting that fix of like fantasy exploration and going on crazy adventures and stuff. So that's what got me into designing games as well, is I wanted to sort of recapture the narrative moments of role-playing with my friends growing up and kind of condense them down into little vignettes so we could still come away from game night talking about these great, crazy, cool fantasy adventures that we'd had together, but without having to commit to reading thousands of modules and rule books and everything else, and just sort of getting that experience out of a board game instead. And that's how my first game, Gloom of Kilforth, came about.
Cool. So before we get to that, I want to stay on D&D because, as some of the listeners know, I'm also a D&D refugee. I played a lot of it when I was a kid. What is your favorite D&D story growing up?
Wow. There are so many, but I think probably the one that we came back to maybe 3 times was Castle Ravenloft and the House of Strahd module. So we were playing first and second edition back when I was growing up, and the first time I played it as a player, I was blown away. You know, we had a great DM. It was a really atmospheric module, and I ended up getting my hands on it after we played it. After I played it as a player, and then ran it twice as a DM further down the line, and it was just, you know, a really evocative sort of version of Dracula, right? And so it was a real opportunity to try and create an ambience that we didn't always have. You know, a lot of our D&D was mucking about and you know, just messing about and having a laugh and stuff, and it always tended to go off piste. And sometimes when I'd be the DM trying to run like a scary or, you know, a horror type module, and the gamers would just be having a complete laugh at everything that was happening. So it didn't always go to plan. But
it's like a Bela Lugosi movie. It's like some vampire jumps up. Ooh! It's like, this isn't scary.
Yeah, I'd be wanting to do like Halloween, and it'd come off a scary movie instead. So.
Yeah, actually, I funny you mentioned that, because we were introduced to Ravenloft, my group, by a TPK. So we were in like the regular realms, Forgotten Realms and whatever, and we totally just dumb. Like it makes sense. It doesn't make sense out of context. It said you had to be their story, but it was just dumb. We died, and my my DM was like, I don't want this to end. Before you actually die, I have this new module in the world of Ravenloft. I'm just gonna teleport you guys there because of you're on a mission. And it's like, this is kind of weak, but whatever. We get to keep going. So we played Ravenloft, and it was really cool. And actually, it was really awesome to like at the time, I was like, oh, this doesn't make any sense. But now, like, you know, kind of looking at the whole campaign, I was like, oh, you can do that. And now that's the magic of role playing, right? You can get away with stuff like that. So, like, I'm really glad that like 5th edition is doing really well. I don't play 5th edition, but that's going like gangbusters, and people are rediscovering that kind of insanity for the first time. It's awesome.
Yes, yeah. There's one of the lads in our regular board game group is a huge D&D fan, and he got into it with 4th and 5th edition. So it's really interesting to hear his stories about it, you know, how that's developed and how different things have influenced. For example, his DM runs campaigns based on World of Warcraft and things like that, and has a sort of MMO experiences feeding into how he creates his worlds, which is, you know, a completely new take, because none of that existed back when I was doing D&D 20 years ago. So yeah, it's really interesting to see how it's evolved, and they've pared it down a lot. You know, the rules were clunky as hell to 1st and 2nd edition. So you'd sometimes gloss over it a little bit and just fudge rolls here and there and stuff, just to try and keep it moving, because, you know, the heroes could meet a band of goblins and that's it. You know, if they started fighting, you're like, okay, well, that's the rest of the night taken care of. We're just going to be rolling for, you know, till midnight sort of thing. But
checking charts and doing complicated math,
everything else. But I think apparently it sounds like it's a lot more streamlined and easy to pick up.
So there is a method to my madness with going on this D&D thing. I don't only want to indulge my childhood D&D stories, because going to Gloom of Kilforth, like, I think in terms of, so this is a big fantasy adventure game, but that is one of the most unhelpful descriptions of a game that you can possibly give in nowadays, because there's just a million of them. So it's like saying, you know, I'm drinking a cola right now. It's like, okay, there's like a million of those, whatever. But I think with this game, you have to get into the D&D mindset. Like, there's so many ways to play fantasy adventure. Like, you can play, like, I'm playing 7th Continent right now. It's like this, there's no combat, or I mean, not really, but like, it's all skill checks and it's all exploration. It's all puzzle solving and narrative. We did Secrets of the Lost Station, which is this kind of more material on House on the Hill. Like, you know, you're moving towards the story twists kind of thing, and there's a lot of, like, dice does a lot of stuff, so like there's a lot of different like ways to locate where your game is. I think you have to get into the D&D overland adventuring mindset in order to start to at least unpack Gloom of Kilforth. Am I right about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's sort of trying to condense an entire D&D campaign into one evening, and to do that everything is sort of zoomed out. You know, you have an encounter with an enemy that's going to take, you know, a minute to resolve rather than an evening sort of thing. And one of the huge things for me playing D&D growing up was that combat was like one element of 100 that was in our games. So it would all be meeting crazy people, going on quests, saving, you know, a lost child, or discovering new artifacts and exploring ancient shrines and things like that. And then there was combat mixed in the middle, you know, whereas a lot of back when I was designing this game, all of the fantasy adventure games were about killing monsters and stealing the treasure, which is, you know, that's fine, but it's very sort of video game based. It was, you know, it's all about the leveling up and destroying things, which is fun in its own right, but I really wanted to explore the things that influenced me when I was role-playing, which were those moments, you know, the sort of heroic moments in between where you'd win over, like rescue a farm, you know, that's been beset by enemies, and, you know, help the people restore that farm to its former glory. Then maybe meet like a crazy gypsy woman in the forest, and if the encounter didn't go well, maybe she puts a curse on you and things like that, and all these sort of different moments that emerge when you're having these narrative experiences. So there, I mean, there is combat in the game, and you can, you know, defeat orcs and things like that, but there's also lots of other encounters and events that occur whilst you're playing, and it's hopefully over the course of the game, you know, in one evening sitting, you'll go from that sort of very early experience of setting out on an adventure and having nothing but a gold piece in your back pocket to finally being great enough and powerful enough to sort of save the world by the end of the story, by the end of your hero's saga, as we call it in the game.
Yeah, so they talk about, in D&D parlance, they talk about like the 3 pillars. There's combat, there's exploration, and then there's interaction with the NPCs. So a good module kind of has to have all 3 of these pillars in order to be called a good module, and they've got a lot better at that. Like I came back into D&D in 4th edition, and man, there was no room for that other stuff. It was combat. That game was an area tactics game. And 5th edition, they open up however you feel about it. Some people were like, no, they just dumbed it down again. But whether you like or don't like what they did, they opened up room for those 2 other pillars. And it sounds like you did that, or you tried to do that here. So like you have these system of skill checks where, you know, and the skill checks could be interactive, and you can kind of inject whatever your, you know, whatever fills your mind about that stuff. So like how the interaction goes. And then there's the exploration part too. So like you have this map of, I believe it's 5x5, 25 different cards, and just kind of go from place to place. So I'm assuming that that's kind of what you mean by injecting more than just the goblin grinding into your game. Absolutely.
I didn't know about those 3 pillars until you mentioned it, but I think those are this sort of key elements that you seize on when you're playing a game like this, or, you know, a role-playing game. So that definitely makes sense. And exploration is a huge part of it. So as you say, in this game, it's a 5x5 map. You start out completely empty. You don't know what's out there in the world. And every time you move out into a new location, you have an encounter, you know, and it could be a benign. And a lot of the encounters as well, it's sort of discovering the world. So if it's like an ancient place or a stranger or a quest that's there, you're not immediately engaged in it. You don't have to go on it. You could leave this poisoned local lass to her fate and just move on if you're so inclined. But it sort of starts opening up this world, and the more you explore, the more you see of this land. And I think from the player's point of view, not knowing what's coming is part of the fun of it, you know, and not being sure what's out there is. It's kind of the exploration is what hooks you in, but I've also tried to give each type of location a theme. So, for example, in the game, you can go to mountains, plains, forests, and badlands, and each of them has all of the encounters that you can meet in the decks. But, for example, the mountains are riddled with dungeons and are filled with enemies. So if you go into the mountains, you know you're more likely to meet an enemy. So you've got to act accordingly. If you've just set off and you've got nothing in your pockets and you've got no weapons or anything to take on enemies, when you go into the mountains, you need to be hiding, you know, and you need to take action to avoid those enemies jumping out at you and kicking your butt. So if you start out and you want to have sort of peaceful adventures early on, then you know to head to the plains, which are more likely to contain strangers. It's where, like the settled lands where the people live. So if you go into the plains, yes, there are a couple of enemy encounters in there, but you're more likely to just meet strangers who you can try and chat to and win over to join your cause. So there are sort of tactics in the game, but it's mostly narrative driven. What's going to happen are these little vignettes and stories that emerge as you play. And one of my favourite things about playtesting was afterwards talking to the players, and they'd always give these stories about their heroes, rather than like, oh, I like the stats on this, or, that particular mechanic or whatever. They would talk about these little moments, where they rescued somebody or found this invisible bridge, and, these sort of crazy little tales and quests during the game. And that for me was the focus. If you could come away with a great narrative, then, I've achieved what I wanted to do with the game.
Yeah, so like if this was a second edition D&D campaign, if you went to the mountains, you'd have to memorize Fireball, Magic Missile. and if I go into like a town place, I'd have to memorize Hypnotize Person. And
you'd have to identify spell instead.
Yes. So there's when I first encountered the game on the first Kickstarter, I have to admit I was a little bit scared away because people were comparing this game to Talisman, the old board game, and like that game is horrible. I mean, it's a cool game, it has a cool like vibe to it, but it was like the mechanically it's just ugh. But then the kind of next iteration of that was Runebound. So yeah. Runebound is that's a real kind of go out adventure, level up, and have like different narrative stories. So how much was the influence of maybe Talisman, but definitely Runebound on this on your game?
Sure. Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, I played both of those games. Runebound, loads. Talisman maybe hundreds of times as a kid. And one of the things that always frustrated me about Talisman is you were never massively in control of your own destiny because of that dice roll, and then you're like, I want to get to the church maybe. Oh no, I rolled a 6. I'm going to have to skip past it. And, narratively for me, that was a huge disconnect because the hero would sort of go, hey, there's the church over there. Oh no, I'm walking too fast. I've gone past it.
What a conveyor belt. Where am I going?
Yeah. Maybe next turn I can go there. Oh no, I've gone past it again. And it never fit with me. And with Runebound, again, a game I really enjoyed. Solo, I think more than with the group. But it was a series of fights, and the fights getting tougher and tougher and stuff. And it never really satisfied that urge in me to have a complete adventure experience because it was so focused on combat. That's not to take away from Runebound. If you're after that experience, it's perfect for that. But for me, I wanted to focus more on meeting strange people, going on quests, exploring places, having events happen to you and things like that. And then having the combat and the leveling up and skills and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, they're both probably touchstones. I guess the biggest touchstone for me at the time was the original Arkham Horror board game, where it had all these great sort of narrative adventures hidden in the world. But the thing with Arkham Horror, again, it drove you to combat. That for me, the most fascinating things about the game were when you would go to the stable locations and have these cool story encounters, but the game never let you do that because you were too busy running around killing monsters and trying to shut the gates, So playing that really triggered my imagination. And at the time, you mentioned before calling this a fantasy adventure game is not helpful because there are so many out there. But, well, there weren't. Back when I was designing this, there was nothing else like it. So that was a real urge for me, was to want to play the game that didn't exist. And actually, I still don't feel like it does. I love those games that you mentioned, and Seventh Continent is fantastic as well, but it's more of a puzzle game, and I think, again, provides a different experience from what we're trying to do with Gloom of Kilforth, which, maybe like an advanced Talisman, it wouldn't be far off. Yeah. But if you see somewhere on the map, you can just go there, you just head towards it, and there are a few sort of Euro mechanics in the game to help support that rather than you rolling for everything, your actions that you make each turn are based on choice, and they're based on your hero's health. So the more health you have, the more actions you have. And if you're injured, you can do less. You have to try and rest up to get your actions back. So you're sort of managing your health as a resource and your actions as a resource. But the idea is, if you want to do something, you can go and do it. It's just how much time and energy you allocate to that task. So, for example, if you're a wizard and you're great at quests, but you want to explore a place which maybe doesn't play specifically to your skill sets, if the place is quite difficult to enter, you might have to spend all of your actions in a day to try and go to that place and explore it and fully explore it and get the recognition for being the one who discovered the ancient shrine or whatever. But then that decision's on you. You might think, do you know what? I do want to do that. That's part of my saga. It's part of my adventure. But I'm going to come back to it when I'm more powerful and I'm better able to tackle that. Or you might go, if I get that now, that's going to push my saga further along. So I'm happy to spend all of my time and my actions in pursuing this. So it does come down to dice tests, like each of the skill checks. But it's up to you how many skill checks you want to spend, how many actions, how much time you want to spend invested in each particular adventure. So there's loads of choice. You're not always thrust into these situations, providing you play it tactically and you're careful with your exploration. 9 times out of 10 you're going to be able to say, okay, I want to go here and do this, and I'm going to spend this much time, this many days exploring that, and you're allocating your resources to doing that exploring, and hopefully that'll pay off and give you won't feel cheated, like, oh man, I drew this card, I rolled a 1, now I'm a toad, so that you can see what's coming. And if it's a big hairy monster and you're a low level guy, you're just going to run away, and that's okay. You'll come back another day to try and fight. But you see it with new players every time. I always say, right guys, you're low level heroes, you got nothing in your pockets, you're about to set off in this huge quest, get hidden, go into stealth mode, make sure the enemies don't get a jump on you. And you'll always get a player who's like, no, I'll be fine. And they'll just march up into the mountains. They'll be like a gargoyle and they'll be rinsed, in the first move. And like, wow, this game's so hard. And I'm like, well, it's up to you how hard you want to make it for yourself.
Oh, I will get into some things that gamers say about this game in a minute.
Okay.
I'm sure the stuff that I've pulled from the forums, I'm sure you've read all of it and you have some answers for it. So, but I have gone 20 minutes before actually bringing in the new content that is new in this Kickstarter. Sorry about that, guys. But yeah, you have 3 small box expansions that are coming out in the Kickstarter, one of which is gameplay driven. So do you want to break down the 3 different things you have to offer?
Yes, sure. So the game sold out within a few weeks, really, of it landing, which is fantastic. And the distributors wanted to get a print run going as soon as possible. For me, I thought it was an opportunity not just to have new players catch up and get a copy of the game, but also to give existing players something to be going on with, really, because we do have a sequel planned for the future, which we're going to kickstart next year, called Touch of Death, which is essentially the same game again, but it's like a standalone expansion. So you can play Touch of Death or Gloom of Kilforth, or you can shuffle them all together and like double your content and have twice the amount of variety and adventures and stuff. Wow. So this particular Kickstarter that we're running now is like a patch to go between those two. So it's going to be loads of extra content for existing players. They can buy the Encounters expansion, which is a small box plug-in expansion. Well, I say small, we've unlocked tons of stretch goals now, so I think there's about 70 odd cards in it, which are all unique, and they just shuffle into your existing decks and just give you this huge extra variety. If you've played the game 100 times and you know every single card backwards, then this will give you all new stories and stuff. We also have another couple of boxes that you can order as expansions in this campaign, one of which is it's called Dark Gloom. So the original artist came up with some pictures that were a little bit racy, or just some of them were a bit sick. So we kind of took them out to make it like a PG rating, and that caused a bit of an outcry back during the original campaign. So I said, well, okay, we'll offer these as an alternate art pack. So they're not essential to the game, but for people who just want to see what we were, originally came up with, they can just plug in and get that, and again, just shuffle it into the existing game. And then the other, so that's the second expansion. The third expansion is, again, really sort of responding to what people have said in the forums about the things that they wanted to change, or perhaps thought would pimp it up a little bit. So we called it the Pimp My Gloom expansion, and it just fixes a few things, or not really fixes. I mean, I'm happy with the game as it is, but these were basically to service those fans who wanted these things. So it's more dice, a bigger velvet bag, more standees for the heroes, and little bits and pieces that are just sort of the things that people asked for. And we just thought, okay, well, we'll throw those in and give them as an option to players who want them. They're not essential for the game, but if you want to, big up your experience a little bit, you can add these in.
Do not underestimate that bigger draw bag. You get your hand in there, and it is like that, because you're pulling it from a lot, so you're just kind of moving it on. It's like, the hell, I'm just going to put it in a cup. Nice big velvet bag. That is definitely cool. I would like to kind of point out something that some of the commenters have said, like especially the Dark Gloom expansion, but the whole package. You're in for some cost, right? So is that where the cost come from? Is that kind of the art and everything like that? Because it's this isn't just like a pack of 52 cards you can get from your local store.
No, absolutely. I mean, this is, I would describe it as a boutique game because as a player, I've never seen anything like it before. And it's something I was really excited about. The original game, we had nearly 300 unique pieces of art. And I thought it was this crazy cool decision. And that it was really going to, when it landed, everybody would just be like, oh my God, every single encounter in this game is completely unique. Any other card game that I've ever played, you get cards in like pieces of art in triplicate or 10 pieces of art. The deck builders, you'll see the same art over and over and over and over, and so I really thought it was going to blow people's minds about how much uniqueness and how much beauty, because I mean this is, in my opinion, some of the best art in the world in these kinds of games. And so every single encounter you have is completely unique, and the cost of that was insane. I mean, it's fair to say that the artist took the lion's share of the funds. So I really wanted that to be like a huge thing for new players who opened it up. They saw the quality and the value that they were receiving was unlike anything that they'd ever seen in a board game before. And for some that landed, that really hit. And, it was a huge selling point, and a lot of the core players were really happy with it and really impressed. But there was also this sort of backlash of like, wow, it's a card game. Why is it so expensive? And people didn't really understand, I don't think, how much went into it and why it took so long. From the Kickstarter funded in September 2015, and we were only able to deliver it this summer. So there's a good 18 months we put into developing of this game, and that was all the art, because all the design and mechanics and everything else was complete. So it was a wake-up call for me, really, because it's one of those things that you want to do as a designer, as a creator, is deliver something really unique and interesting like this. And I'm still determined to do that with the expansion as well. But moving forward, it's a steep learning curve, and I'll probably never do it again. We'll just do what Fantasy Flight does and what all the other games do, and make sure that we get the most out of those assets, because it's from a business point of view, and this is the critical thing now for us as a business. This isn't just our first Kickstarter anymore. To move forward and to grow, we need to make decisions that are business based and aren't me going on with myself and saying, right, it's an artistic decision or whatever. And so with that in mind, we've just got to be realistic about costs and price accordingly. And unfortunately, it is a boutique game. So some people will say it's not for me and vote with the wallet, and that's fine. We want people to pledge responsibly. But then a lot of the hardcore backers love this stuff, absolutely love it. And they're the ones who are going full tilt, or haul in, as the pledge is called.
Yeah.
And make sure that they get everything, they don't miss out.
So then, so in this game, it's like hundreds of unique art assets, and it all this and everything that's happening and everything that opens the door to. So like the art assets might be a little bit gnarly, so that causes backlash too. So,
yeah.
So that's what's going on. So for the next game, you mentioned what was it called?
The Touch of Death expansion.
The Touch of Death. I keep on wanting to call it A Touch of Evil, and that is a different roll and move.
That's a great game. It's not this one, but it's a great game.
It is not that one. So then for Touch of Death, are you going to have more the scaled back? The art assets will be still nice, but you'll repeat some of them and all that kind of stuff?
It will depend entirely on the funding, Jason. So if we hit the same sort of figures that we did the first time round, I will probably have to scale it back, because luckily I was full-time employed when we did the first Kickstarter, because the margins on these things are a lot tighter than people might expect. But now that we're sort of picking up traction we had another Kickstarter for a separate game, 1066. I don't know if we can talk about that in a bit, but
sure, right at the end.
Okay, that funded, and then this one, of course, the expansions we've already funded. In fact, we funded it within 4 hours, which was absolutely spectacular. So if we can get the funding, I'd love to keep doing it, but it will be moving forward from the outset. It will be designed like a normal game, with a reasonable amount of assets in.
Right.
And then, depending on the funding, if we could sort of blow enough stretch goals out of the way, then we will unlock extra unique art, because I love it. I mean, I absolutely, as a gamer, if I picked up something like this, I would be blown away. And I want to have that. I want to have that for the core backers and the people who appreciate that. But it will entirely depend on how high we can reach.
All right, hence why you're on this podcast.
Yes, absolutely. Getting the word out.
That's right, we're getting the word out. Okay, so there are a couple of things that gamers have said about the gameplay itself. So we talked about the art and the cost and that kind of thing. Gameplay itself, let me bring up a couple of things. And I know you've responded to them in different areas, but I like to kind of get it all in one place.
Sure.
So first is the rule book. That people had a little bit of a issue penetrating the rule book. And I know that as a first-time designer, it's, that's like the hardest thing. Like,
definitely.
we've even like harder than cost is being the hardest, but like in terms of the things that gamers see, that's the hardest thing to kind of bring to life. So could you tell us a little bit about your journey with making the rule book and if there's going to be any ways to address it?
Absolutely. So I reiterate exactly what you said about making the rule book is probably the hardest thing because it's a different art form. Again, you can design a game, but if you can't get that how to play that game out of your head and into somebody else's head, then it's not going to help anybody. And I was keenly aware of, not perhaps being the best person in the world to design the rule book. So with that in mind, I employed a professional, Patrick Brennan from Fantasy Flight Games, and he put the rule book together for me. And I was blown away because he found all these loopholes that my initial drafts had just left hanging, and he closed them all. And so he introduced rules and terminology and a structure that I'd never seen before, and delivered the final rulebook, which was the one that we released that came with the game. And a lot of backers think it's great and they've learnt the game completely from the rulebook. But because it's thick, it's like 30 pages, as many backers have said, I can't get it, the rules don't work for me. And so we're going to retouch it up. We're going to clarify rules here and there. None of the actual rules are changing because the game is intact and it works great. But we're going to try and sort of fit in more examples, add a glossary page, with the page numbers, add a player aid to, help people just have an overview of the turn order sort of thing. And we've also had professional run-through videos from One Stop Co-op Shop and Rolling Solo and Ricky Royal and J-Play, who've all gone through the gameplay. So we've done everything we can to sort of pick up these people who perhaps struggled with the rulebook a little bit. But at the end of the day, it is a semi-complex game, so it's not going to appeal to everybody. It's a gamer's game. So if you are put off by complex rules, watch the playthrough videos first and check that it's the kind of game that you'd enjoy. But yeah, we're doing everything we can to sort of clarify the process as much as possible. But as I say, the rules are fixed as they are. None of the actual rules are changing themselves.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so probably so that's like the first thing the gamers see because you open the box. Oh, great! Now I got to see the rule book. 32 pages. No. Actually, speaking of that, so Fantasy Flight breaks their rule books up into two.
Yes.
So you have the Learn to Play first book, and then you have kind of a glossary of like the rules that you need to know. Would you consider doing that approach maybe down the line?
From a personal point of view, probably not, Jason. Just because I've learned and played Fantasy Flight games doing that, and they spread the rules across both books, and so you might miss something that's in the Learn to Play book that you're looking for in the rule book, and vice versa, and it just gets a bit fiddly. So I think as long as you've got a glossary, I'd rather be flipping through one rule book than multiple rule books. It's the same with Mage Knight as well. I mean, it's another one of my favourite games, but literally every single time I play it, I have to work through both of these rule books trying to find the answer that I'm after. And particularly more and more now, I tend to have the rulebook for a game up on the iPad, and then it's searchable.
Yes.
Just one PDF. You just go hiding, okay, and off you go, and you've got the rules for hiding. So I think keeping it all in one place is still the best way. And if you can have like a turn overview, so that people get the gist of how the game plays, that might help as well. So
I think that was the first sound effect that we've ever had on this podcast.
Like that guy at Police Academy. Sound effect.
Okay, so then I think the most substantial criticism that people have of this game are what people have of Runebound and of Talisman, that it's random. So I'm going to quote one of the BGG reviews. So very fiddly for what it is. A lot of luck and variance in the game. Easy to get screwed through no fault of your own. Brings no new mechanics, and after something like Gloomhaven or Mage Knight, this game feels like a mechanical step back in time. So maybe that's a little bit of two criticisms of, okay, there's just dice rolling. It's all like the resolutions are all dice based, and the card play, like the deck has its own kind of randomness to it. So there's all that, and it feels like an old design. Like that's how we used to game, and now we have Mage Knight and Gloomhaven, which are very intricate, tightly designed experiences. So how would you respond to that criticism?
Okay, well, that sort of criticism sounds like it's come from somebody who's frustrated by the game, by the difficulty of the game. And I think that harkens back to what I talked about before about, setting out with the right frame of mindset for your adventurer. If you're a low-level adventurer and you go into the mountains and you draw a big monster and it's going to clobber you, there's very little you can do about it. So what you'd have to do is early on, make sure you're playing to your skill sets, make sure you're playing to your strengths. So go to the places where your encounters, where your skills can help you out. So if you're a sneaky rogue type character, you're great at exploring places. Places are most commonly found in forests. And if you hide, get out into the forest, get some places under your belt first, get some titles to go with it, which are like rewards, which boost your stats and give you cool abilities, then you'll be ready to go and tackle those monsters and stuff. But if you just charge out thinking, I'm going to be able to take on whatever's in this game, then you will get hammered. And I love that. That comes from a little bit from the original game Magic Realm. I don't know if you ever played that.
Yeah, that's a classic.
Yeah, well, the world
people are dying to get it reprinted.
Yeah, and I love that brutality in Magic Realm. That if you make the wrong decisions, you don't go to the places that play to your strengths, you're going to get wiped out. And I love the idea that the world is terribly, terribly dangerous, and that you can meet these huge bosses really early on, basically, so that you have to plan accordingly. So, with regards to you have no control over your fate, I would argue that you do. You are able to choose the type of location that you go to. For example, that if you go to Badlands, you're more likely going to find quests. Quests play to study your statistic, which is like the sort of intelligence of your character. So if you're a wizard type character, you'd want to go to Badlands, resolve quests and get spells. And yes, you can still find enemies in there. You might even be able to find hermits and strangers in there, but that's going to play to your skill sets. And it's even quite sort of color-coded. The study stat is purple, the Badlands are purple, the spells are purple. So you can sort of trace these really sort of overarching ideas of what encounters exist where and what sort of rewards you get for going there. And experienced players tend to sort of find that, you can plan around this. And the more you level up, the more skills you get, the more rewards you have, the more you're able to tamper with the dice rolls. So you can use these skills to get automatic successes or to overcome certain enemies. If you get a paladin on board, you're going to be able to wipe out a third of the enemies instantly because this guy's so strong and so powerful. And you can get him if you go to the market, which is in the city, which just requires some gold. So there's all these sort of strategies that can counter the difficulty of the game. And if you play it enough, you'll pick these up. Maybe we could even do a strategy guide, but I hate stuff like that. I hate spoilers. I love, if you're exploring a fantasy world, I love discovering for myself, okay, this is how it works and stuff. But a lot of people, if you have that bad experience of a game, and it's one opportunity to play and enjoy it, very rarely people are going to come back to it and go, okay, I hated that game, I'll give it another try. And if they have that frustration, this is how these critical reviews come about, unfortunately. But for every one of those, we've got 100 other people who've said what an amazing experience they've had with the game. So it's, at the end of the day, it's flavors of taste, and everybody has different tastes, and you can't account for those. And it's the reason that Justin Bieber exists. People just enjoy different things, and what's one man's treasure is another man's trash. And I think this is a treasure, but your mileage might vary, and that's why we've got the playthrough videos on the page there, so you can see for yourself if it's the kind of thing that you're going to enjoy.
Okay, and this last one is a little bit wonky. I'm curious about this myself. So the enemies, there's no real scaling for it. So like the game proceeds over 25 days, and on day 1 you can encounter some giant monster, or you can encounter some pixie, and then on day 25 you can encounter either a giant monster or a pixie. So so like in video games, what you do is as you get more powerful, the enemies kind of automatically get more powerful, which is a little bit of a disconnect. But when you do it right, it represents like the land getting more dangerous. The big enemy is like, you know, calling up his worst monsters to beat you now that you've gotten his attention. So was that a kind of thing that you had? Like, you know, like make maybe a Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 deck or something like that? Or are you happy with the way the game is?
Originally there was, yeah. But it staggered the encounters so much that you kind of knew what was coming. You know, there's not enough time in the game to really sort of implement that and make it work well. So when we had like the color code system, it's a bit like Runebound, you know, where you have the sort of green encounters and then you move up and up and up sort of thing. It meant that each sort of environment that you went into, you would be like, okay, well, I know I've got to get through a kobold, a goblin, and a dog or whatever before I get to the multiple enemies.
Dog.
and at the end of the game, then you'd be sort of just deck hunting, and it really took the sort of scale of adventure out of it, because you're like, okay, I got to get through this guy to get to this guy to get to this guy. And again, in video games, I always felt there was a disconnect there where you're like, oh, look, all these bandits are suddenly really tough again. I feel like if you go to a location and you're more powerful, then you experience that power, you know, and if you're like a really powerful guy, you go back to a location full of goblins and you can wipe them out, and you're like, wow, I've really come on, rather than, oh, wow, each of these goblins is like a full-on ninja, you know. So the idea in this world in Kilforth is, yes, you can meet the Reaper on the very first turn of the game, and he can probably kick your ass, and you might have to spend a day recovering from that, and you'll lose all of your gold, which at that point in the game would be 1 gold piece, you know, and then you know he's there on the map, and so for the rest of the game, you know where the Reaper is, and when you're powerful enough, you can come back to his lair and take him out. So I love that. I love that the randomness is there, but it's how you approach it, you know, and how you tackle it, and when you prepare and you level up enough to go back and take him out. And it also teaches you to hide and be careful about what sort of encounters you're having, because you're building sort of paths through the world as you discover encounters. So, as I said before, if you've like discover that a stranger lives in the mountains, if you don't interact with them, then they will stay there until you do, you know, or until a card from the game interacts with them, because the game has its own set of encounters as well. So at the end of every day, after you finish doing your adventures and stuff, you draw a night card and the game will do something. And the idea is, if you were to, I mean, this mechanic is in place so that if you, for example, just said, I'm doing nothing every day and I'm just going to see what the game does, and you just keep drawing these night cards, then the world starts falling into gloom. People appear, heroes come out and fight monsters, and they do all these sort of things without you doing anything, and it's to try and give this living, breathing world with no sort of barriers. So yeah, I personally really enjoy the fact that you can come up against these really tough guys early on, and they might be your nemesis, and it's like, God, he's the reason that I lost my paladin or whatever really early on. I'm going to take revenge on him later on in the game. But yeah, it can be difficult in that respect. But if you play it tactically and you play to your skill strengths, you can overcome these, and you can work out ways to get around these bad guys.
Oh, okay, cool. So that is all the questions I have for Gloom of Kilforth. Do you have any final things that we may have missed, or that you'd like kind of take home points for people to have about the game?
I could probably go on with myself for hours about this, Jason. I'm conscious of your time.
No, not hours.
I like that you've gone straight for those critical questions, because then it gives me a chance to respond to them accordingly, and you know, us not just go on with ourselves about it. But no, I think we've covered loads of points there, and all the information we have about the game, the expansions, the extra content, the stretch goals that we've unlocked, is all on the Kickstarter page. Go and check it out if it's something that you might be interested in, and you might absolutely love it. So yeah.
Cool.
And let us know your thoughts. We're really active in the comments as well. We reply to every single comment on the Kickstarter and on Board Game Geek. And at the end of the day, it's a community-driven game. It's carried by the backers and by you and the people that pledge and support us. So we're just really happy to be here and be creating something interesting and artistic that people are seizing on and enjoying. And it's just such a wonderful collaborative feeling.
Cool. And that is not all from Hall of Nothing Productions. We have the sequel, a standalone expansion coming next year, which is, I have to really try hard not to say Touch of Evil. It is Touch of Death. And there's also another game that was just recently finished. I believe it's called 1066 Tears to Many Mothers.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's technically our second game then, 1066, and it's a completely different style. It's still a card game with gorgeous art and everything, but it's a 1 to 2 player game that plays in about half an hour. So you can play this on your lunch break, and it's a recreation of one of the most important battles in English history, which is the Battle of Hastings in 1066, which changed our history for hundreds of years afterwards. So every card in the game, it plays like a non-collectible Magic the Gathering type game or Star Wars, one of those kinds of head-to-head card games. But every character in the game is based on a real person, a real event from the history. So the idea came about from watching people play Pokemon and Magic and things like that, and memorizing to the nth degree the statistics of like Pikachu or whatever. And it struck me that what if people had this similar sort of gaming experience, like a cool sort of head-to-head card game, but actually came away learning a little bit about history, and learning perhaps who Bishop Odo of Bayeux was and why he was so important at the Battle of Hastings and things like that. So so all of the cards are based on history, and the game builds through the historical events that led up to the Battle of 1066. So you play as King Harold and Duke William, who came head to head, but they have to go through a series of objectives that the real characters in history had to overcome. So the players are actually going through the things that those characters had to do to get to the battle, and then once they get to Hastings, they kick off, and it's a bloody resolution to trying to kick the crap out of each other in a card game format. So it's all extrapolated into cards, but it is all based on the history as well, and it's a completely different flavour of game from Gloom of Kilforth. And for me, it was important as a designer to sort of flex some different creative muscles to try and do a completely different type of game. And again, it did really well. We funded it on Kickstarter. We managed to beat the original funding goal of Gloom of Kilforth by £100. So that was interesting. It's also a much smaller game, so it has like half the content and half the price tag. So we got a lot more backers. It reached further than Gloom of Kilforth did originally. But now we've sort of leapfrogged it again with the Gloom of Kilforth expansion. But yeah, so 1066 is due to land early next year. We're just completing the artwork on that. And it's not too late to late pledge. So if anybody wants to check that out as well, 1066 Tears to Many Mothers is our other beautiful card game from Whole or Nothing Productions, as you say.
All right. And if you want to reach out to Tristan, he is eminently available. All I had to do was reach my pinky toe into BGG, and there he was. So I'm sure he'll be available to you as well. And I think Colin tells a story on One Stop Co-op Shop of how he had bought the game and you sent him a little message going, "Oh, hey, what did you think?" And he didn't even ask for that. So that really speaks to your availability. And so that's great. And so backers, just reach out to Tristan when the Board Shitless podcast comes back out. Please take a look for that. And I think that's just about it in terms of outreach for the fans, my man.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time, Jason. I really appreciate you taking your Sunday morning, I was going to say afternoon, your morning to come and speak to me and let me, as I say, go on with myself about my games. It's a brilliant opportunity.
I hear my daughter pitter-pattering upstairs, so time to go up. So, thank you very much for coming. And thank you guys for listening. The response to the preview series has been really, really heartwarming. I like this forum that, I've created, and with Anthony's help, he did the first one and I've kind of run with it, of, letting Kickstarter backers Kickstarter creators tell their story. I've gotten a lot of good feedback about not only have they been, decided to back a game because of knowing about the game, but also knowing about the stories and being familiar with the people behind it. So I'm very happy to keep on bringing this for you guys. But that's going to wrap it up for another episode of the preview series. We'll be back next week with another Kickstarter creator. Until then, later, everybody.